Yo, what's going on people? It's your boy Huncho, back at you again with another video. And so for this next one, we've got to head over to Wolverhampton, where a trial has just wrapped up over the murder of a 15-year-old boy. This came as a result of two rival gangs warring it out with each other within the city, that being V2, which is short for the WV2 postcode, which is located in the southeast of the city, and their rivals V3, short for the WV3 postcode, which neighbours WV2 in the southwest of the city. So again, this story follows a 15-year-old boy by the name of Keelan Wilson, who also goes by the drill rap name K-Sav, and from reports it's believed that he lived in the Merry Hill area of Wolverhampton, which would mean that his home is located in V3 territory. It's not clear how he became involved with V3, but what is known is that Nehemie Tampwo, another alleged V3 gang member, was one of his close friends. At some point in early 2018, it's believed that Keelan, after getting involved with V3, had then switched sides to V2, but it's not clear as to the reason for the switching of sides. Although, according to a mutual friend of the pair, he would come out to say that Keelan had revealed he visited Telford to be a quote, drug sitter to get money. This to me potentially shows that Keelan could have been swayed by V2 to basically start selling drugs for them, but again, I just want to make it clear that it's still unknown for the side switch. Some point after the switch, it's believed that some text messages were exchanged between Keelan and Nehemie, and this was according to Keelan's dad Gary Wilson. A short while after these messages were exchanged, at around 8:20 PM on the 22nd of February 2018, it's believed that Gary and Keelan were driving in the Merrydale area of Wolverhampton, and they had seen Nehemie as they were driving. A confrontation soon played out after, and according to conflicting reports, which we're going to get into as the trial comes around, it's believed that either Nehemie had pulled an axe out on Keelan, or Keelan had produced a machete and put it up to Nehemie's face. Nothing is reported to have happened for the following couple of months, but then on the 29th of May 2018, this V2 versus V3 rivalry would escalate even further, to the point that on this day it would see Keelan go on to lose his life, and his former friend Nehemie would go on trial for his murder along with 3 others years later. But it isn't just one incident that takes place on the day, it's actually a series of small clashes at different times, which ultimately ends up in Keelan going on to be stabbed to death. So the first incident starts at around 3:40 PM, where hooded youths are seen waving machetes around near Marky's Barbers in Wolverhampton city centre. It's believed that an initial confrontation had started out within the Barbers and spilled out into the street. Keelan wasn't involved in this incident, but it's believed that one of his friends, known as Kai Bell, was. It's believed this fight had involved V2 and V3 gang members. Between 5 and 5:10 PM, Keelan Wilson is then picked up on CCTV walking down Leg Street, which is located in V2 territory. Remember, recently, up until that point, it was thought that he had switched sides to V2. As he's walking down the road, 2 men come up and approach him. One of them is on foot and the other one is on a bike. The pair start to chase after Keelan, and then a shotgun is discharged in Keelan's direction, which misses him. A Honda car that's associated with Keelan then drives into the bike, but the rider jumps out of the way. Everything then goes quiet for a few hours, but at around 11 PM, police were called to reports of a group of youths fighting on Strathfield Walk, which is close by to Keelan's home in V3 territory. When they arrived, they found Keelan suffering from multiple stab wounds, and he would be rushed to hospital, but would unfortunately go on to be pronounced dead a short while later. But the investigation would become a difficult one for detectives because as the days turned into weeks and the weeks turned into months, they still hadn't gone on to charge anyone with Keelan's murder. Then in November of 2019, around a year and a half later, reports would come out that 3 men had been charged with Keelan's murder. That included 18-year-olds Tyrique King, Zenay Pennant-Phillips, and Nehemie Tampwo, Keelan's old friend turned rival. The reports that had came out at that point also said that during this investigation, 9 other teenagers had been arrested, but they had all been released under investigation. In May of 2020, nearly 2 years after Keelan's murder, police would then go on to charge 19-year-old Brian Sasa. All 4 men were charged on a single count of murder, which they all went on to deny, and so a trial was to go ahead, which started in October of 2020, and believe it or not, ran all the way until January of 2021. In court, prosecutor Michael Duck opened up by saying that it's a matter of real sadness that people of such youth have the willingness and capacity to take the life of another person, as the prosecution say they did. It's not just the fact they took the life, but the manner they chose to do it. It wasn't a split-second reaction. This was a well-planned and coordinated group attack by a number of youths armed with knives, and I make no apology for saying it was planned to execute another young man. The prosecution continued, Keelan was sat in a taxi with a close associate and the driver of the taxi just before 11 PM when the group pulled open the rear door, which momentarily protected him and set about with weapons. That act was committed by a group under the gaze of members of the public, and they knew it to be so. The prosecution say that's telling in itself. The prosecution said the taxi driver sustained a minor cut, the other man of similar age who had been with Keelan sustained no injury at all, and to them this showed that this was the plainest evidence that Keelan Wilson was a target by this group. A timeline of events is then told to the court, which we've previously spoken about in regards to those small clashes, and the prosecution said that there was no doubt that Keelan Wilson, as young as he was, had been embroiled by gang culture by 2018. Talking of the moments just before Keelan was murdered, it's believed that he and an associate of his were fixing a red Citroen on Strathfield Walk when they asked a man known as Rupert Dooley to call them a taxi because they failed to repair the car. Rupert had been walking with a woman who went by the name of Deborah Kearney, and Deborah would go on to tell the court what happened next as the taxi was pulling up for Keelan. She would go on to say that she was walking home with Rupert and they eventually reached the gate of a house. Of course, by this point, the taxi had pulled up, and it was here Deborah seen a group approaching Keelan. She went on to say that she thought nothing of this group, but it became anxious after one of them shouted Keelan's name, and they started to run towards him. She continued, they shouted, "Keelan, Keelan, Keelan," as they got level with me. It was one of them that shouted his name. I described it like a whooping war cry, shouting for someone's attention. It was very eerie hearing that sound as they shouted his name. As they started to run, 2 of them had extendable telescope weapons that came out of nowhere. The prosecution asked about what happened next, and she said, they struck the taxi and I heard windows smash. She continues, at that point, having got into the taxi, they dragged Keelan out and blows were being rained upon him. She then walks away to get a phone and then calls the police, and apparently by the time she comes back outside, they had vanished and she went straight over to him and knelt down by his side. What happens next is Deborah actually tries to talk to Keelan, but Keelan never says a word to her, and Deborah just said that he was just looking at me. In regards to a description of the group, Deborah said there were definitely 4 of them, maybe 5, and appeared to be between the ages of 15 and 18 years old. Rupert's description of the attack was pretty much the same, but he compared it to a group of piranhas feeding, so you can see how vicious this attack really was. The prosecution said that this violent ordeal lasted around 20 seconds, and within that short space of time, Keelan received 43 knife wounds. They continued by saying that the attack was, quote, particularly tragic as it was close to Keelan's address, with residents becoming aware quickly that a significant incident had just taken place. One of those residents, the prosecution says, was Kelly Ellett, Keelan's mother, but apparently she didn't know it was Keelan until she recognised his clothing. She gave evidence in court and she said how she saw blue lights flashing going past a house at around 11 PM on the night of the murder, which was followed by her son's name being called through an open window. Upon hearing the name a second time, she rushed out of the house to see what was happening. She said, I could not see where the incident had taken place. All I saw was blue flashing lights going past. I did not do anything to begin with. My bedroom door was open and I heard a bit of commotion at the back of the house as the bathroom window was open. I heard what I thought was Keelan's name. I thought, no, it can't be his name. I did not think he would be at the back of the house. I heard his name for the second time and then I panicked and ran downstairs and then outside. I turned left out of my house and left again down an alley. I saw one of my neighbours standing near the ambulance and she said that it wasn't Keelan. I continued to walk over, although she said it wasn't him. The fact I heard his name made me think it was someone Keelan knew. I thought someone had been run over or something like that. When asked by the prosecution if she recognised Keelan at that point, she then goes on to say, at that point, yes, I did notice that it was him, and told the jury she had recognised an item of clothing and quickly realised that he sustained a quote number of stab wounds. Kelly would go on to say that earlier on in the day, she had taken Keelan to have his haircut at a barber's in Bushbury before visiting the city centre to pick up some parcels. She had parked a car in the Manda Centre and went into the city centre with the younger son, leaving Keelan in the car. A phone call was then made to her by Keelan, and he told her something had happened in town and told her to come back quick as he wanted to leave the city. She said, he told me someone he knew, Kai Bell, had been attacked in another barber shop in town. I was told Marky's Barbers. This is the incident which we previously spoken about where V2 and V3 gang members had that fight in Wolverhampton city centre. Kelly told the court that Keelan had asked her to take him to see Kai, which resulted in an argument as Kelly didn't want him to go. She eventually gave in though and dropped him off in the Leg Street area. Only moments after getting out the car, he'd be picked up on CCTV walking down Leg Street, and then this is where he would go on to be shot at. But the next she heard from Keelan was at around 8:20 PM when he texted her to say his battery was on 1%, so if she texted him and it didn't go through, his battery of course died. Less than 3 hours later though, she discovered that he had been murdered. Gary Wilson, Keelan's father, had also gave evidence in court, and if you remember we briefly touched on some text messages being sent between Keelan and his previous friend Nehemie. While describing those messages to the court, Gary said that they were quote unpleasant. Continuing, there was only one text in particular that referred to Keelan's mum. She had a newborn son. It was something about going down to his house and mentioned his granddad and brother. Keelan showed me and he wasn't happy about it. It said they were going to go into the house and do stuff to his granddad and his brother. I had no idea why these messages were being sent. I told Keelan just to forget it. Gary also tells the court about the incident where both he and Keelan had bumped into Nehemie in the Merrydale area of Wolverhampton. Describing the incident in a bit more detail, he said they were both driving along a main road when all of a sudden they seen Nehemie, so they stopped the vehicle to try and sort things out. Gary said, I said to Nehemie, what's the problem? We need to try and sort this out. You've known each other for a long time. But he continued, Nehemie was just saying to Keelan, come round the corner. And according to Gary, Nehemie had a JD bag around his shoulder and he kept pulling it off saying, come round the corner to Keelan. Describing what happened next, he said Nehemie took an axe out of the JD bag and it was at that point Gary says he jumped on him and they both went to the ground and apparently the axe fell to the side. Gary said, I can't remember what he did, but I grabbed the axe and took it to my van. As he was taking the axe to the van, Gary said that both Keelan and Nehemie were scuffling, and then Gary goes on to tell Keelan to let go and told him to get into the van. At that point, they get into the van, and Nehemie asked for the axe back, and Gary said he wasn't prepared to give it back. But Nehemie's defense solicitor put forward the case that it was in fact Keelan who had been the aggressor, and even went as far as saying that Keelan slashed him in the face with a machete. Under cross-examination, Gary would go on to deny that this had happened. Nehemie's defense said, on the evening of February 22nd, 2018, you were with your son in your van at around 8:20 PM in Merrydale. You were only made aware of Keelan seeing Nehemie when Keelan said, there's Nehemie, it was just a chance meeting. Gary answered, yes. The defence said, when Keelan got out of the van, there was clearly a meeting of the two face to face. Could you see it? Gary said, yes, I could see that. I pulled up adjacent. I could see them. I could see what was happening. When I pulled up, Keelan jumped out of the van. Nehemie was across the road. As Keelan went across the road, I could see Nehemie. For a few minutes, I thought to myself, leave them, let them talk it out. I came out of the van and could see Nehemie had a bag and he kept taking it off. I thought, this doesn't look right. The defence then asked, was it in response to Keelan taking out a machete to slash Nehemie across the face, to his lip? Did you see your son with the machete? Gary responded, no, that did not happen. No, I did not see my son with the machete. The defence said, did you see your son being attacked by Nehemie with an axe? Did you take the axe off Nehemie? To which Gary said, yes, I saw it. Yes, I took the axe off him and put it in my van. it had a green handle. In court, it was heard that Nehemie Tampwo had actually travelled to Telford the day after he allegedly stabbed Keelan Wilson in Wolverhampton. When he arrived at the address in Telford, it was said that he handed over a jacket, trainers and trousers to 2 individuals. The clothes never got disposed of though, and this ended up placing Nehemie at the scene of the murder. In more detail, the prosecution said on the morning of the 30th of May, Nehemie was picked up in Wolverhampton and went to an address of 2 individuals in Telford. He provided an explanation that he wanted to get rid of the clothing given to him by a man who had been in a shooting. The items were shoes, trainers and trousers, and they were not disposed of and instead were recovered. The trainers were examined and carried DNA and blood belonging to Keelan Wilson. It also carried DNA that was consistent with Nehemie. More of Keelan's blood and Nehemie's DNA was found on the jacket that had been recovered. The prosecution added, there was a man on the morning after the murder trying to get rid of his clothing that bore Keelan's blood and his own DNA. The prosecution say that the blood of Keelan Wilson was sprayed onto Mr. Tampwo's clothing as he lunged a knife into him. Recognising the danger of evidence, he wanted to rid of his possessions of clothing by imposing it on 2 individuals to get rid of it. The court was also shown DNA evidence which was recovered from the taxi which Keelan had been stabbed in. Zenay Pennant-Phillips' fingerprints were found on the rear offside door handle, and Brian Sasa's fingerprints were found on the near side door. In court, CCTV footage was played which picked up a group running on nearby Langley Road, and the prosecution put forward that this group is the 4 men on trial after they had just stabbed Keelan to death. The footage takes place only a couple of minutes after the time of the stabbing, and so the prosecution say again that the group picked up on the CCTV are the same group that murdered Keelan. But after a 3-month trial, all 4 men would go on to be found guilty of Keelan's murder, and they're all due to be sentenced to life in prison when the sentencing date comes around on the 19th of March 2021. And overall, this story is sad on all parts because, for one, Keelan's death was so senseless, and the way he died, like the witness said, was like piranhas feeding, so I couldn't imagine someone having to go through that, and then of course the parents having to relive that in court as well. And to top it all off, it was actually one of Keelan's old friends, of course, who turned into a rival over a postcode beef, and that is just something that we really have to think about, that young people are dying on the streets of the UK in these cities over quite literally where your house is or where your flat is or wherever you live. And that's the sad reality of what's going on in the UK right now. But I do want to take this time out just to say rest in peace to Keelan, and my condolences do go out to his family and friends who have been affected by his death. But let me know what you guys think of this down in the comment section below. Give the video a little like, and if you want the latest drill, street and music news out of the UK, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. It's been your boy Huncho, and I'm out.